Today we will read from the Bhagavad Gita, which means the Son of God, spoken by Bhagavan, there from the name Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavan Shri Krishna, standing on a battlefield at Kurukshetra 5,000 years ago, just before a big battle is about to commence, and before the battle, Arjuna, who is a warrior, supposed to fight in this battle, becomes compassionate with his family and friends who are standing at the opposite side. Difficult situation. And in this difficult situation, he's surrendering to Krishna, not knowing what to do. He's very much aggrieved by the situation, having to fight this fraternal war. And he asks Krishna if it can be right, really, to do this. And Krishna says, why are you succumbing to this weakness? And from that, the whole Bhagavad Gita becomes spoken. And today I thought we could look at chapter 10, which contains the four most essential verses of Bhagavad Gita, and I thought maybe text number 9. So, we chant a mantra to invoke auspiciousness. You can repeat after me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So, Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translated and commented by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Text in chapter 10, called The Opulence of the Absolute, text number 9. So I read this Sanskrit verse and the translation, and then after the translation there's a purport by Srila Prabhupada, which I will read, and then after that we'll talk a little bit until about 4:30. Achita madgata prana bodhayanta parasparam kathayantaschamana nityam tushyanti charamanti cha. Translation: the thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. Krishna speaking. Prabhupada's purport. Pure devotees whose characteristics are mentioned here engage themselves fully in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Their minds cannot be diverted from the lotus feet of Krishna. Their talks are solely on the transcendental subjects. The symptoms of the pure devotees are described in this verse specifically. Devotees of the Supreme Lord are 24 hours daily engaged in glorifying the qualities and pastimes of the Supreme Lord. Their hearts and souls are constantly submerged in Krishna, and they take pleasure in discussing Him with other devotees. In the preliminary stage of devotional service, they relish the transcendental pleasure from the service itself. And in the mature stage, they are actually situated in love of God. Once situated in that transcendental position, they can relish the highest perfection which is exhibited by the Lord in His abode. Lord Chaitanya likens transcendental devotional service to the sowing of a seed in the heart of a living entity. There are innumerable living entities traveling throughout the different planets of the universe, and out of them there are a few who are fortunate enough to meet a pure devotee and get the chance to understand devotional service. This devotional service is just like a seed, and if it is sown in the heart of the living entity, and if he goes on hearing and chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, that seed fructifies just as the seed of a tree fructifies with regular watering. The spiritual plant of devotional service gradually grows and grows until it penetrates the covering of the material universe and enters into the Brahmjyoti, effulgence, and the spiritual sky. In the spiritual sky also, that plant grows more and more until it reaches the highest planet, which is called Golok Vrindavan, the supreme planet of Krishna. Ultimately, the plant takes shelter under the lotus feet of Krishna and rests there. Gradually, as a plant grows fruits and flowers, that plant of devotional service also produces fruits. And the watering process in the form of chanting and hearing goes on. This plant of devotional service is fully described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila chapter 19. It is explained there that when the complete plant takes shelter under the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, one becomes fully absorbed in the love of God. Then he cannot live even for a moment without being in contact with the Supreme Lord, just as a fish cannot live without water. In such a state, the devotee actually attains the transcendental qualities in contact with the Supreme Lord. The Srimad Bhagavatam is also full of such narrations about the relationship between the Supreme Lord and His devotees. Therefore, the Srimad Bhagavatam is very dear to the devotees, as stated in the Bhagavatam itself. Canto 12, chapter 13, text 18. Srimad Bhagavatam Puranam Mamalam Yad Vaishnavanam Priyam. In this narration, there is nothing about material activities, economic development, sense gratification, or liberation. Srimad Bhagavatam is the only narration in which the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord and His devotees is fully described. Thus, the realized souls in Krishna consciousness take continual pleasure in hearing such transcendental literatures, just as a young boy and girl take pleasure in association. So the verse again, Machitta Madgata Prana Bodhayanta Parasparam Katayantaschamam Nityam Tushyanti Charamanticha. The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. This is the second of 4 verses which are called the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. And in this verse, the characteristics of pure devotees is described. The reason why we take an interest in devotional service in Krishna consciousness is because we want to learn what actual pleasure is. The soul the living entity is always looking for pleasure. This is all we do in life. Why do we do anything? Because we want enjoyment. Of course, in the material world there's always a certain amount of suffering in this material body. We are a soul, we are an eternal soul, a spark emanating from the Supreme, as eternal as God. And that individual spark, which is in person distinct from God, but in quality the same as God, this soul is eternal, it's never born, it never dies, and it's called Anandamayo Bhyasa, which means the nature of the soul is Anand, meaning happiness or bliss, pleasure, joy, positive state, Sukham, a positive state of mind. And we are always seeking that Sukham, but instead of getting Sukham, we're getting Dukkha. Dukkha. Sukha means good feeling, good ether actually, Ka means ether. Dukkha, bad feeling, bad atmosphere. So, Sukha, Dukkha, these are that's the duality of the material world. Sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad. It's like that. What goes up must come down. So the nature of the material world is that it has its limits, because this body has its limits. The problem with the soul is that it identifies with the body. We once, in our natural state, we have a spiritual, fully developed form, a spiritual, fully developed form in relationship with God. But when that soul wants to enjoy separate from God and uses free will to turn his back against God, then he becomes reduced to a spark and enters to the material world and takes body in 8.4 million species of life. And these bodies that we have in these 8.4 million species of life, including plants, insects and microbes, they are all limited, because the matter itself is limited. You cannot have endless anything with matter. Matter is always limited, just like a rubber band. You can stretch it and then it snaps. So happiness in the material world has its limits, because the body has its limits. And since the soul is not the body, the happiness that the body experiences has nothing to do with the soul. But because of a higher arrangement, the soul is allowed to identify with the material body, thinking that the pleasure of the body and the sufferings of the body are the sufferings of the soul itself. And that is the illusion of this material world. So by proper knowledge, for example, by listening to Bhagavad Gita from the Lord, then we can understand that no, we are not the body, we are a soul and we belong to the spiritual atmosphere. And the business of this human form of life, as distinct from other forms of life, such as animals, plants, insects, microbes, even demigods, the specific significance of the human form of life is to be able to think abstractly about one's own existence, to be able to reflect on one's own existence, to see and analyze things in a detached way, in a philosophical way, and to realize the self. That is the purpose of the human body. And we know, of course, that we have a human body, and you can calculate the chances of becoming a human. There are 8.4 million species of life according to the Vedic literature. I think on Earth they have counted some 2 million thus far. According to the Vedic literature there are 8.4 million species of life. Of course they're still counting. But we accept the Vedic literature as authoritative. And so there's a little chance of becoming a human being. And among human beings, Krishna says, there might be one among thousands of human beings who has a desire to realize the self. So you can just make the math. How many people live in Copenhagen? Well, around 1 million, I guess. So how many people are here today? Not 1 million. So it's a few. We're a few fortunate souls who take interest in Krishna consciousness. And out of those who take an interest in even liberation or anything philosophical, very few know Krishna in truth. Very few. And to know Krishna in truth, it is required to know Krishna from somebody who already knows him. Somebody who is a devotee of Krishna. You cannot learn about something from somebody who doesn't know the subject matter. If you want to know the queen, you better speak to somebody who knows the queen, and then maybe you can get in contact with whatever. And the same thing with God. God is so far away, so difficult to understand. How do we understand God? So we have to get in contact with somebody who has seen God and who knows God. And that person is called a pure devotee. Sometimes God, Krishna, comes himself to teach this science to the human beings, like he did here to Arjuna and everybody else, including us. And sometimes Krishna sends his pure devotees from the spiritual world to educate and teach us. And when they come, the only thing we have to do is to listen and learn. Just like Srila Prabhupada, he is definitely not an ordinary person that came to the West. We can take it for granted that he was sent by the Lord to write these books that we are reading now. And the chance of meeting such a pure devotee, or even coming into contact with his teachings. Of course, Srila Prabhupada is not with us physically anymore, but he's very much present in his books, such as the Bhagavad Gita, and also, as mentioned, in the purport, Srimad Bhagavat, which can be bought here from the temple in big quantities. They are not very expensive, so any spare money should be used on that before you leave. And the chance, as I said before, to come in contact with such a pure devotee is likened to the chance of a turtle, a tortoise, swimming in the ocean, who sticks his head up to get some air, and by accident happens to stick the head up through the hole of a plank, floating on the ocean. Can you imagine? What are the chances? You make the math, I don't know. But it's not very big. Not so big. So that is the luck that we had. That here in Vendus there is a distribution of the knowledge of the pure devotee. That is how rare it is, as a living, even as a human being, to come in contact with a pure devotee. So we should all consider ourselves lucky. And we should understand that this knowledge is pearls, and therefore we should not be swine. That the pearls should not be thrown for swine, as they say. So in this Kali Yuga, the human beings have got this blessing to be able to enjoy like pigs in human bodies, and they do. We do. And so it's very difficult for human beings in this Kali Yuga to accept spiritual instruction. In the Bhagavatam, in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, in first canto, chapter 2, verse 11, it is described, Mandas manda, mattayo manda bhagyahu padrutaha. Hey, I forgot the verse. Anybody help? Gaura, Bhavan. Rayan alpayusha sabhyam, kalir dosh, no, that's not, oh yeah, kalir dosha, no, what is it? Come on, help me, Panditi. Nah, mandas manda matayo, manda bhagya hu, upadruta. In this iron age of Kali, this is called the Iron Age, the age of cold steel. Human beings are short-lived, maximum 100 years. Most people don't live 100 years, some do. They are quarrelsome. Kali means quarrel. Not to be confused with Kali, the goddess of the material world. Kali is a demon. he has a lineage and descendants, but he is allowed in this age to be some kind of devil in our hearts, always wanting to fight, Kali. So they are quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, and above all, always disturbed. The biggest problem in life today amongst people is basically mental disease. So many people are insane nowadays. It's because of lack of spiritual consciousness, lack of spiritual action, spiritual behavior, and lack of proper eating, sleeping, all that. With that comes imbalance, insanity, all that. So this is this feature of this age. Very unfortunate we are. Very difficult to accept austerity, accept sacrifice. The only thing we know is enjoyment, but we're not getting it. So we should think, I'm looking for enjoyment, but I'm always suffering. So why is that? Yeah, it's because we are not these bodies. And now we have come in contact with the teachings of somebody who knows God, and the only thing we have to do is to listen to that and learn and act accordingly. That means to chant the holy name every day, as the devotees do, is very recommendable practice. And Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. The devotees, they chant this mantra a couple of hours every day in the morning. It's like recharging your batteries. Like if you have a mobile phone, you need to recharge it every now and then. So the soul in the material world is out of contact with God, so it needs to be recharged. That rechargement usually happens during sleep, during something called deep sleep. When the soul is in very deep sleep, it's recharged in the Brahman. So devotees, they chant Hare Krishna and they read the Srimad Bhagavatam to each other. The devotees very much enjoy Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, the words of Krishna and the words about Krishna, and they enjoy talking with each other about it. This is how the devotees, they enjoy themselves. Because they have discovered that there is a greater pleasure in that kind of activity than even in satisfying the senses of the body. The senses of the body may require a certain amount of satisfaction that is given, but the real pleasure in life comes from the soul's relationship with God, in Ananda. And that pleasure becomes invoked when devotees come together and talk about Krishna. From the books, for example, they chant Hare Krishna together, they speak from the Bhagavad Gita together, they speak from the Bhagavad together, and in this way enjoy life. It's such a simple thing. You just keep your mind on Krishna, his pastimes, his devotees, the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad. It's full of narrations that can be enjoyed, even from the material platform. These stories in the Bhagavad, they're charming. But the difference is, when you listen to these stories, you become purified. When we listen to stories from ordinary books, even very good books, the result is that the senses become agitated and they want to have some enjoyment. We get passionate, or we want to have some material enjoyment. But the result of enjoying transcendental books is that we experience what is called here Tushyanti Charamanticha, meaning that we become pleased and we enjoy transcendental bliss. Both things. Well, Tushyanti means satisfaction. Tushti, when you've eaten, you are tushti, you're satisfied, no needs. Everything is peaceful down there, no agitation. When we're hungry, but we are peaceful in the stomach, and then from that peace can arise transcendental bliss, Ananda, which is, Ananda is not just peace, it is a dynamic pleasure, which is unending in nature. You know, material pleasure has a beginning and an end. It may be intense, but it's usually not so long. But Ananda is different. It can increase and increase and increase more and more. It's unending. Anandam buddhivardhanam pratipadam purnam ritam. It is eternal nectar. It's an ocean of eternal nectar. Like Lord Chaitanya describes it, that there is an ocean of Sankirtan. Anandam buddhivardhanam. It's like a big ocean that you can dive in and it never ends. An endless ocean. And you dive into that ocean by just talking about Krishna. The only requirement for two people, or like many people, like there's one speaker and an audience, for example, like now, the only requirement is that the speaker has to some extent know what he's talking about and has to be keen on the subject, but also the listeners, they have to be enthusiastic to hear. When the listeners are enthusiastic to hear about Krishna and want to hear about Krishna, then there is an atmosphere created that is actually identical with God Himself. Then God is actually present. Krishna becomes present by that activity. And actually Krishna once told Narad Muni, I am not in Vaikuntha. I am not in the hearts of the yogis either. No, Narad. I am there where my pure devotees chant and hear my glories. That's where Krishna is. Shravana Kirtana. The activity which is going on in Krishna temples is called Shravanam Kirtanam, which means listening to the teacher who brings the message from the Godhead through the spiritual disciplic succession. Where did he get the message? He got it from his spiritual master, who got it from his spiritual master. And all the way back, you can trace it all the way back to Krishna. Of course, this that Krishna spoke on the battlefield of Kurukshetra is not exactly coming in our disciplic succession, but it's the same thing. Or is it? No. Wait a minute. Am I saying something wrong? Arjuna was not mentioned in the disciplic.
No, it's not mentioned. It's
not mentioned. So, but there are many disciplic successions. This one we are following is coming from Brahma. From Brahma to Narada. To Brahma in the beginning of creation, many millions of years ago. And then from that to his son Narada, who 5,000 years ago gave it to Vyas, who then wrote the Bhagavad, and then further on. And here we are, in the same chain. 5,000 years later, the same unadulterated book, the same knowledge, not changed through the ages, and it has the same potency. So, we take the knowledge as delivered by the spiritual master, and then we become empowered also as spiritual master. We give the knowledge to the next generation of aspiring disciples. This is the way of transcendental knowledge. It goes down through the chain of disciplic succession. It is not a subject of speculation or experimental knowledge. It is not that somebody had a vision one day and said, okay, I saw Jesus and he told me this. Or I am now God and I can tell you that you are all God. You don't have to listen to anybody, you are all God. Only listen to me. Yeah, that is what is, where somebody says like that, don't listen to anybody, you're God. You're God. So then you listen to him. Huh? What you do, you listen to the guy who tells you you're God. That's what you do. Then he becomes your guru. That's cheating. Cheating. Don't accept the guru. You're God yourself. So that becomes your guru. Huh? Then he becomes your guru. No, we are not God, because God does not have to go through suffering in the material world. We are little gods. Microscopic gods. Little copies of God with the same propensity for enjoyment. But since we are little microscopic copies of